Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This channel is for educational purposes, and we try to turn you on to great theories of everything, grand unified theories, all-encompassing theories, concepts, and hypotheses that are outside your purview because they've been suppressed. Things that the powers that be don't want you to know for whatever reason. And maybe they aren't even the powers that be. Maybe they are the, competing powers that are trying to take over the world, but don't yet. Or whatever they are, there are people that are suppressing certain information outside of your realm unless you do a lot of digging. And this is our 317th Bible Decode. We've been looking at various aspects in the New Testament to help us understand what's written in there. There are many different ciphers that you can assess the Bible, especially the New Testament, you can look at it, as a matter of mythology, as a matter of astrotheology, as part of a mystery school, in the context of the mystery schools, the pagan mystery schools. You could look at it as derivative of Egyptian and or Greek philosophy, Roman philosophy. You can look at it through the lens of the Dead Sea Scrolls, through the lens of entheogens, and frankly, through the lens of pornography. And but mostly, we've been looking at it through the lens of the Roman origins hypothesis, and that is that the New Testament was written in reality by the Romans, the Caesars, in particular the Caesars of the Flavian dynasty, and they did so in order to counteract the Jews, really to tame or domesticate, assimilate, or prune the Jews, who had, because of their jealous and zealous God with psychopathic tendencies and seeing his people as the chosen ones, they were very xenophobic and separatists. They saw the commandments and other strictures in the Old Testament as being kind of a replacement for logic and reason, and so they had all of these nonsensical, to the Romans, nonsensical rituals and strictures and commandments that they had to obey, and they were willing to die in order to maintain those things. The circumcision, Sabbath on a Saturday, the animal sacrifice, Passover lamb rituals, the kosher food laws, and all this was quite irrational to the Romans, and also quite high maintenance for the Romans, because the Romans were in charge. The Romans had pulled into Judea as the conquerors in 63 BC. And so for over 100 years, they had to put up with the Jews always revolting and insurrecting and even assassinating and terrorist attacks. And this all kind of culminated in this war between the Jews and the Romans from 66 to 73 AD, when a number of really individuals, self-described Jewish messiahs, subject, pursuant to the Old Testament predictions for a Jewish Messiah to rise up and help them defeat the, evil colonial power, whether it was the Greeks or the Babylonians or the Persians or the Romans. In this case, it was the Romans. And so in 66 BC, there were a number of these characters that kind of rose up and did overthrow the Herod Agrippa II, who was in charge of Jerusalem. One of the puppets, the Herods were really puppet rulers of the Romans. And so this sent Herod and Herod Agrippa II and all the other Herods back to Rome. And so the Jews actually did kick out the Romans briefly. What that all happened, then Emperor Nero sent in the Roman legions, led by General Vespasian, and this happened in 66 A.D. Vespasian prosecuted that war for 3 years until he actually got the call to become the new emperor, which was as the result of the Roman Civil War. Emperor Nero was assassinated in 68 AD, and he was replaced by a succession of emperors who were all assassinated within a 12-month period. Galba, Emperor Otho, and Emperor Vitellius, all assassinated. And so now it's like Vespasian gets the call. You're going to be the new emperor. So come back to Rome. And he left his son Titus in charge of the military there to finish this war against the Jews. And Titus utterly destroys Jerusalem in 70 AD. And, the Jews keep fighting, moving further south, and they barricaded themselves in this fortress at Masada, and eventually, according to the story that you read and the history that you read, they basically all killed themselves rather than submit to surrender to the Romans in 73 AD. Now, meanwhile, Vespasian is trying to shore up his security there at Rome, given that the last 4 emperors had all been assassinated in quick succession. Titus comes back to Rome in 73, recognizing that there was a great triumph, and to be able to drag the defeated enemy combatants through the streets of Rome and employ them as slave labor to build the Colosseum, and to participate in the, what's known as Christians versus Lions at these kind of events at the Colosseum, but were really Jews versus Lions. So that's kind of the backstory. Now, that's kind of the backstory for the Romans deciding, as a piece of psychological warfare, to write a write about a substitute Jewish Messiah, who, rather than putting all his apples in overthrowing the Romans, this Jewish Messiah was going to be a Prince of Peace, and one who believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, walking the extra mile with the Roman soldiers' heavy pack, and turning the other cheek to oppression, recognizing that the Romans had been appointed also by God to, rule over you, and that slaves should obey their masters, and that the Roman slave-owning soldier had the greatest faith in all of Israel, and at the same time taking pot shots at his own people, the Jews, by overturning the tables of the money changers in the perimeter of the temple, and castigating the Jews who were selling small animals for the sacrifice at the temple, and telling his Jewish followers to abandon their families and go follow him. These are things that, first of all, a Jew would never do, and second of all, they are things that played directly into the hands of the Romans, almost as if the Romans wrote them themselves. And then when you proceed further into the New Testament to get to the Pauline material, Romans and Corinthians and Galatians, and so on, Ephesians, Paul is even more pro-Roman than Jesus is, and even more anti-Jew than Jesus was. And so you can see the Romans' fingerprints all over this if you look at it, but then just at a circumstantial level. And then another red flag is that the Gospels, the whole New Testament, is written in Greek, which is one of the two languages that the Romans used, along with Latin. And it was quite rare in Judea. Those people would have been speaking Aramaic, which is kind of an offshoot of Hebrew. And only the upper crust of the society would have been speaking, and most of them were illiterate, but speaking and or writing in Greek. But the evidence becomes direct when you start to look at the works of Josephus, who is supposed to be a Roman historian who wrote from Caesar's palace as an appointed member of the royal court and an actual adopted family member of the Flavians. The Flavians was the name of the dynasty of Caesar started by Vespasian, continuing to his son Titus, and then eventually Domitian, Titus's younger brother, from 69 to 96 AD. Josephus was known as Flavius Josephus, and incidentally, Flavius means blonde or golden. And Josephus claims that he was of Jewish extraction and fought with the Jews in this war, but eventually surrendered to Vespasian and defected to the Romans, and was rewarded for predicting that Vespasian would one day become the emperor. And Vespasian pardoned him and brought him to Rome and adopted him as a member of his family, put him up as in a townhouse at Caesar's palace, and so on. I find that very hard to believe, and I have to really kind of think that Josephus was really just a pen name of one of these Caesars or one of their agents. But he wrote a 7-volume work called War of the Jews, which is a history of this war. And when reading it in conjunction with the New Testament, parallels start to pop off the page if you know what you're looking for. When it gets to the part in War of the Jews when Titus enters the scene after Vespasian is summoned back to Rome, and Titus enters the scene, and you start reading from that location. Titus's first onset is really at the Sea of Galilee, and he's fighting a battle against the Jews on the water. You can start there in the book of Luke at the location where Jesus meets Simon and Andrew on the fishing boat and tells them that he's going to make them fishers of men. These if you start at those two events and read from there, you will see that there is a long series of events that are parallel between the two. 40 plus events that all take place in the same order, and they all have parallel themes, and they all take place 40 years apart, because the Gospels are backdated by 40 years, written in the 70s but set in the early 30s and or even late 20s. And so the ministry of Jesus is nothing but a copy or parody of the military campaign of Titus. And that's just one of almost a myriad of parallels between the two books. That's the one that is kind of the most easy to point out. Another one is that Titus is the second coming of Jesus, because Jesus predicts in the New Testament that his second coming will be, will be signed by the destruction of Jerusalem. That will be the sign of my second coming. And Titus is the man who destroyed Jerusalem in precisely the way that Jesus predicted that it would happen. And that those are all those pieces of detail are all in Josephus's War of the Jews. Now, we are looking at one of the many authors, one of the many suppressed authors who have identified this. And this one is a little bit more controversial because of his methods. His name is Roman Piso, and also his origin, because he claims that he is a distant descendant of the powerful Piso family of the first century. They were known as the Little Caesars, and they were really rivals of the Julian dynasty of Caesars that started with Julius Caesar and went all the way through Nero. And then the Flavians came in. Roman Arius Piso, who's his main character here, was, according to Piso, was kind of the co-emperor, along with Vespasian and Titus. He was kind of like the Henry Kissinger type of shadow figure behind the empire. And that Arius Piso was using the pseudonym of Josephus in his writing. But not only that, but he used a myriad of aliases and wrote under many different people's names. That's really Roman Piso's argument, is that all of our literature from ancient times, or really even anything before the printing press, all of it was written by the royal families and their representatives. Whether it is ancient Egyptian, it was written by somebody in the Pharaoh's court. If it's Roman, it was written by somebody in Caesar's court. If it's Greek, it was written by the Greek, the Greek leaders, however that republic worked, and or by whatever king was involved, whatever pope. These are the only people that are writing literature, but they wrote under a ton of different pen names, pseudonyms, aliases, in order to make it seem like there was some type of diversity of opinion. And in many cases, the same authors would participate in debates with themselves. One example of that is Josephus has a book that's called Against Appian. And Appian was this other character who disagreed with Josephus about various things. And Appian also turns out to be Roman Piso, or Arius Piso. He's arguing against himself. So they were creating kind of controversy and strong beliefs and passions and drama amongst themselves. And they also wrote in what he calls this royal language, which enabled them to kind of code things so that the other royals could understand what was going on, but the common people would be diverted into whatever propaganda that these writers were trying to convey. Now, we're looking at a ton of Roman Piso's articles. He's written a couple hundred of them, and some of them are book length that are all on this ResearchGate site. I've read at least 100 of them and taken notes, and we're just kind of going over some of my notes here. He's talking about Bruno Bauer. Bruno Bauer was really the first modern historian to write about this topic in his book Christ and the Caesars, and other books that he wrote in the 1870s or so, and at the University of Berlin. And he wrote other books as well. So he's one of the kind of the founders, or one of the first authors here. I believe he was one of the teachers of Karl Marx as well, but that's neither here nor there. Then there's also James Valentine Hannay at Oxford, and he was kind of worked with this Encyclopedia Biblica, created by Oxford professors, and this work gives a lot of detail about the origin of the true meaning of the biblical words, and especially all of the body words, or the words of a sexual nature, which the New Testament is saturated with. Now he also talks about the Apocrypha, all the books that didn't really make the cut for the New Testament. A lot of these books were discovered in Egypt at a place called Nag Hammadi in 1945. A big cache of books were discovered, and they included things like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, a Gospel of Philip, and many other Gospels and Acts and epistles, and even Revelations have been discovered over the years that haven't made the cut into the Bible. There are 4 Gospels, but there are dozens of other Gospels, and there's one book of Acts, but there are literally dozens of other books of Acts that you've never read before, unless you have done a lot of digging and your priest or pastor has discouraged you from doing so, because they've told you that these books have been excluded for good reason. Well, I would say that it's probably up to you whether that's a good reason or not, and that if you are a real follower of Jesus, that you would read these because you would be curious as to what they actually say. Why would you accept the authority of your priest or pastor over your own eyes following the text of reading a book? You know, if it's BS, then it should arouse your BS meter, you know. But don't let your priest or pastor tell you what to do. Anyway, so Arius Piso maintains that all of the Apocrypha were also written by the Romans. Calls it an inside job. Since I see that material as having been written by the same individuals as the canon material, I generally refer to it as the Apocryphal New Testament. Material or non-canon New Testament text wasn't included because it either revealed too much or it contained items that did not represent Jesus or other New Testament characters in the best light. The Gospel of the Birth of Mary was authored by Arius Calpurnius Piso around 95 AD. And many of his family, it was a family business. His father was actually one of the founders, at least according to the theory. His father Gaius was one of the founders of this committee to form a new universal religion to replace Judaism, basically, and incorporate all of the other pagan systems and other Near Eastern systems and Egyptian. And that's really what Christianity is. It's just a kitchen sink, or everything but the kitchen sink of other people's theories and discoveries and philosophies that are all just kind of thrown in there, and none of it is original. The Proto-Evangelion was authored by Justus Piso, his son, with help from Pliny the Younger. Justus Piso and his son and Arius's younger brother Pliny the Younger were really the authors of the Pauline material, the epistles of Paul, and they did this Proto-Evangelion about 98 A.D. According to Roman Piso, and also Abelard Reuchlin is along with independently kind of determined this stuff. And they did so by looking at letters written by Pliny, Tacitus, and other royals, where they kind of, if you study them, you can kind of play the shell game of names and figure out who is who, where were they at a certain time, and kind of figure it out through inference. Okay, so Proto-Evangelion is supposed to be a historical account of the birth of Jesus and the perpetual Virgin Mary, and is supposed to have been written by James the Lesser, cousin and brother of Jesus Christ. James the Lesser being chief apostle and the first bishop of the Christians in Jerusalem. This work has been traditionally ascribed to James. So one would think that what would reveal the true authorship of this work is to find out just, I'm not sure what that is. Abelard Reuchlin had attributed this work to Justus Piso, and with the help of both Pliny and Arius. The first Gospel of Infancy of Jesus, Arius wrote that. Also 95 to 100, Gospel of the Infancy according to St. Thomas, was also Arius. Epistles of Jesus Christ and Abgarus, king of Edessa. Now, Ralph Ellis really contends that this king of Edessa was the true historical Jesus. It was written originally by Arius in an earlier period, 70 to 75 AD, edited later by Eusebius, who was a distant relative also of the Pisos. He was probably Constantine, or in Constantine's family, he was a contemporary of, or sidekick of Constantine, Eusebius, around early 4th century. Gospel of Nicodemus, also known as Acts of Pontius Pilate, that was written in an earlier period, 75 AD, by Arius and Pliny. I doubt the Pliny, because Pliny was only about 13 years old at the time, but maybe. Probably edited later by Eusebius and/or Emperor Theodosius the Great, which is late 4th century. The Apostles' Creed says written by Arius Piso and his son Justus, who was also known as Justus Martyr, and Pope Sixtus I. Contributing information and compilation was developed within the family by Domitius Ulpian, also known as Dio Cassius, in the early 3rd century. So all this stuff, you can't really check his work unless you're really good at genealogy. And so you just kind of let it wash over you and see if it can be validated in other ways. It also may have been influenced by Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who was also known as Pope Soter, about 180 AD. The material for the Apostles' Creed then passed down within the family to Emperor Constantius Chlorus, or Pope Eusebius, and then to his sons, Emperor Constantine. Okay, so Constantine the First, also known as Pope Miltiades, and Julius Constantius the First. The finished product appears to have been the work of both. And they were also, Constantine the First was also Eusebius. The first epistle of Clement to the Corinthians, written by Julius Piso, the son of Arius, but he was the son who also wrote the book of Revelation in a much later period, 135 AD, after the Bar Kokhba revolt, this second Jewish war, really, and that Julius Piso was not playing the game. He was opposed to this entire psychological operation against the Jews, and so he wrote Revelation as a reveal of who actually wrote the New Testament. And I would imagine then that this first epistle of Clement to the Corinthians is also in that same light. But it says Julius was executed, I believe, by Emperor Hadrian in the late 130s, and so it says finished by his son Julius II in a later period. So that would be a very interesting one to look at. Also in conjunction with the Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, the Jews, the Pharisees, who founded the rabbinical school there at under Flavian sponsorship, they had been witnesses to this entire psychological operation that is known as Christianity. And so they were also revealing, to the extent that they could, the details of this psychological operation. There's also a second epistle of Clement to the Corinthians. And so both of these are absolutely worth looking at. The general epistle and comparing them with Revelation especially. Now, the other classical work that you need to look at with Revelation is Suetonius's 12 Emperors. Suetonius was supposed to be a Roman historian, but he really was Emperor Pius, Pope Pius I, and also Emperor Antoninus Pius from 138 to 161 AD. And he was one of the grandsons of Arius Piso. Okay, so the general